All right, so we will open the meeting of the Dale Street School Building Committee. The meeting has begun at 7:06 p.m. Just a note for the general public that this meeting is being recorded. And I will also read off the legalese. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Medfield Dale Street School Building Committee is being conducted by remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen or view this meeting while in progress may do so following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. And just to note that those orders were extended through April of next year. So the not being stated in there that was extended by the governor for the record. Okay, all right. So we should be able to get through the agenda fairly quickly tonight. We do have some things to discuss. We have some things to submit to the MSBA upcoming we should discuss. But I'm going to hand it over to left field to walk us through our agenda for the evening. You're muted, Lynn.
You hear me now?
Can now, yep.
Okay, great. So first on the agenda tonight is the approval of we have two meeting minutes to approve. One from the July 28th SBC meeting, and then approval on the June 13th community forum meeting. So does anybody have any comments on the July 28th meeting minutes that were in your meeting packet?
I do not.
If not,
I just think I skipped that meeting. I had to skip that meeting. I think it showed me as a yes attendance. Other than that, it's fine. I think I saw that.
okay, we can make that amendment.
Actually, both I wasn't on either, but the 28th I think I saw as a yes for attendee, and it wasn't.
Okay.
It's very honest of you, Walt.
I'll fix that, Walt.
Oh.
By the way, Mike, I think Mike Weber's on his way. Oh, yeah, he just got into the audience. He was emailing.
Thanks, Tim. Two demerits for Walt Kincaid.
If everybody's in an agreement with the amended meeting minutes, could someone make a motion?
So just before we do that, since Mike just joined, Mike, we were just going through approval of meeting minutes. Walt noted that he was listed as an attendee, that he was not, so that'll be the amendment. So before we ask you for a vote on it, do you have any questions or comments on the meeting minutes as presented?
No, I looked through them, they were fine.
Okay. Would anyone like to make, a motion from Jeff Marsden to approve the minutes as amended?
It was Leo.
A second from Leo. Run down the list. Jeff Marsden.
Yes, Mike, I didn't make that motion. Leo made that motion, but I will surely second that motion.
I apologize. I thought you had said, but that's fine. Leo, we have a
yes.
Start over.
Yeah, Leo moves the vote to approve the minutes
as amended.
Yes, as amended.
Yeah, second, Mike.
Okay, so we'll reverse that. Jeff Marsden?
Yes.
Walt Kincaid?
I'll abstain.
Tom Erb?
Yes.
Mike Marcucci?
Yep.
Yes.
And Mike Weber.
Yes.
Mike Quinlan also votes yes. Motion passes.
Next, we have the meeting minutes for the community forum from June 13th. Does anybody have any comments on those meeting minutes?
None from me. Absent any comments, would anyone like to make a motion on the minutes from June 13th?
So moved.
I didn't state a motion, so.
Motion to approve.
Thank you. We have motion to approve meeting minutes from June 13th. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Mike Weber. Running down the list, Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Walt Kincaid.
I'll abstain.
Tom Erb.
Yes.
Mike Marcucci.
Yep.
Leo Brem.
Yes.
Mike Weber.
Yes.
Mike Quinlan also votes yes. Motion passes.
Next on the agenda, we have some design updates, particularly related to the classrooms and breakout spaces outside the classrooms. So Tina, do you want to put your presentation up?
Yes, I can share my screen. Okay, can everyone see? Okay, as Lynn mentioned, we have some updates, and we had put together some renderings, some three-dimensional renderings of the classroom hallway and the classrooms, and within the classrooms, the general classrooms. So we can start. First, I'll start with the floor plan just to get you oriented. This is an enlarged partial plan of the classroom wing. And what you're seeing is this is a pod of the 4 classrooms. If you were to look at the overall, there were 3 pods, and this is one of the pods. What you're seeing in yellow is the circulation, the classroom hallway. I'm going to try to zoom in a bit so that you can see. Oops. This is the classroom hallway, and as mentioned, there are some breakout spaces outside of the general classrooms, highlighted here on either side of the hallway, as well as at the end of the hallway. And then there's 4 classrooms, as you can see, grouped in 2s. What you'll notice is, just also to orient you, this is the end of the hallway. If you were to continue south, that would take you to the rest of the classrooms and the rest of the building. Also, I put these little arrows on here. So the renderings that you're going to see on the next few pages, the first one is going to be of the classroom hallway standing here, looking this way. So you get a sense of what these breakout spaces are, as well as how it feels as you're approaching the classrooms. And then the second rendering is standing within the breakout space and looking towards this other larger breakout space across the hallway. And then within the classroom, as you come in through the door, the teaching wall is right here. We have the cubbies within the classroom. And one of the views is basically standing by the teacher's desk, looking across diagonally across the classroom. And then the other rendering is standing by the teaching wall, looking basically across as well towards the cubbies. Any questions? Okay, zoom back out.
Are those the back out in the hallway there? Could you just review again? Is that those are little breakout group huddle spaces on the hallway there?
Yep, that's correct. So these areas right here. So there's 2 on either side, and these are flexible. So either one, a it could be individually used or group of teacher, or there could be a staff out there doing some individual work. But also what's nice that it's just outside of these classrooms. So it's shared space. Any 4 of these classrooms can utilize it. And then you'll also see from the renderings that if there are, say, students out here doing a project or teamwork, the teacher or a staff from within the classroom can also keep an eye on them.
And this is only a, this is a 900 square foot classroom, the standard that I'm looking at.
Yes.
Okay. And I see the armoires in the way. So my only question is just on the furniture arrangement, I guess, and this is just a nitpicky thing, just to communicate. Well, right now I see seating for 18 in the classroom, which is perfect size, so I'm okay with that. But I see the kidney table, kind of like where the 3 around, where the teacher would sit and work with 3 students or 4 students. Do you think we could use some? And this is just a thing about how the room would look around the table configuration, I guess, is my question. Just in future drawings,
Leo,
where we might have group tables. Yep.
So I wouldn't pay too much attention to the furniture layouts at this stage.
Okay. Right.
They're diagrammatic. We haven't really had detailed discussions about exactly how many and what the configuration will be. I think this is just, and Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just sort of a basis to start from.
My
but
bad.
No, it's okay. They're good questions. I just want to make sure everyone's clear on it, that those discussions will happen in future phases where we get far more into the details of what the furniture looks like and how it'll function. And
I was gonna say, I don't like white furniture either, so that was my other suggestion.
And everything will be very flexible. I mean, furniture for classrooms these days, especially at the elementary level, can be done in these groupings. They can be done in individual tables. Like there's a way to massage it. So
exactly. That's exactly.
Sorry, I'll clam up. My bad.
No. It's a good question, Leo. I just want to make sure everybody understands what we're here to review tonight.
And Tina, just to clarify, that's seating for 24, correct? Not 18?
Correct. This is a 24, so it's hard to see, but if you zoom in, they're basically groupings of 4,
right?
And there's 6 groupings of 4.
The shadow is covering it. Got it. Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Good. Yeah, there's some shadows in here, but well said, Mike. That's exactly it. These are just placeholders, just to give you a sense of scale of the space. But in the next phase, we're going to have much more in-depth conversations with the teachers and with the school to understand what their needs will be in furnishing. And then we'll really be able to dive into what these classrooms will want to look like.
Now I've seen classrooms. So those, I see a sink. The sink is towards that wall. That's the separate wall there. It was generally where I see cubbies in a lot of designs today. The cubbies are generally right inside there. So I would be curious on the teachers' feedback on that locations. That's all. Okay, but that's it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. There were some iterations, and this was a while back ago, so it might be hard to remember, but we showed several different iterations and configurations of the classrooms. This is where we've landed so far, and these will continue to develop in design development. But at the moment, the cubbies have remained within the classrooms. They are along this back wall right here, or the side wall really. As you come in, you're not within the cubbies. Before, when you came into the front doors, you were basically in the cubby setting, or in a nook next to the classroom
door.
The
door. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just knew the cubby placement is very important to teachers. So as long as the teachers get input on that part, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Leo, Steve met with the teachers on this because we looked at 3 or 4 different cubby configurations, and this was the one that they chose.
Oh, cool. All right, got it. Yep. Great.
Yep.
Sorry, my bad. And I'm sure you mentioned that before, so I apologize.
No apologies necessary, Leo.
These are great questions. Okay. Let me zoom out a bit more. And so what you see here is, as I mentioned, you're standing in the hallway and you're looking towards the end of the hallway where there are windows bringing natural light in. And the breakout spaces are what you see here behind these low walls. And I'll have Kate talk a bit more about the color scheme, the materials, as well as the overall design.
All right, thanks, Tina. So as you can see in the rendering, we started to think about how we could allocate color to identify the different classrooms. This could be done by grade. It could kind of alternate as it runs down the hallway to create some contrast and more of a dynamic feel as you move through the space. In terms of the materials, as Tina mentioned, we have these low walls, which we're showing clad in a tile, so it'll be very durable. And we're also proposing to potentially locate some tack boards here for student display or for the teachers to kind of curate her space as being her own with her classroom. Some of the flooring finishes that we're showing in this space are a very sustainable and durable, resilient tile floor. And we're starting to explore different patterning to create more of a dynamic feel as you move through the space. And then if you move up to the ceiling, we're showing acoustical ceiling baffles, which, especially if there's students in these breakout spaces, it will certainly help with the acoustics in the space. And you'll notice that we have them in kind of a house shape, a roof shape. And we thought that related back to the gable roof that runs throughout the majority of the corridor spaces. And it also starts to mimic the angled shape of the low wall below.
Thank you, Kate. And then on the next,
one quick thing. I like how you raised that height up. That looks a lot better in terms of that seated privacy. That looks good.
Thank you. And I think there's also, you probably see that there's tile here that matches the wainscoting, but other thoughts are, and this will be further developed as we talk through it during the next phase, is that this could also potentially be a tack board so that teachers can post either student artwork or messages and so forth. And then just to point out, as I mentioned, that there are windows from the classroom to the breakout area and also to the hallway, so that teachers can keep an eye on students if they're out there doing some individual work or just students doing some group work. On this next slide, this is really just an alternate. We were also looking at potentially having the same function, but looking to further develop this in the next phase. We're not tied to this yet, and there may be a preference to have the higher wall versus just an open bench so that students can concentrate and not be distracted when they're walking down, when you have other students walking through the hallway. But this was an option that we wanted to take a look at as well, potentially. And then, you know, part of what the outcome would be is having further discussion with the school and the teachers to understand their preference. This is a view also from the hallway. When you were looking at the floor plan, I have pointed out that there's an image, a rendering that we're standing in the breakout space. So that's what this is showing. We're in the breakout space that was to the right of the hallway. And then across, you can see that there's the other breakout space. And then diagonally, you'll see the larger breakout space at the end of the hallway. And Kate, did you want to speak to a few things in this rendering?
Sure. One item that we didn't point out in the first rendering, but something that we thought might be an interesting way to continue the different color identities that each classroom starts to have is on the low walls, where we're looking at possibly tiling them to bring in accent tiles that complement those colors. So you can see this breakout space directly in front of us. We have warm tones that work with the rusty orange color. We're on the opposite side, blue tones, to really help create an identity between the two classrooms.
And then again, this is the alternate. So in lieu of the walls, we're showing a low bench. And then this rendering is within the classroom, standing on the far corner. The windows are right here. The doorway into the classroom is in the background. And I'll turn it over to Kate.
Sure. So the colors that we had in the breakout spaces, we're looking at continuing them into the classroom for that lowered soffit ceiling when you first walk in. You'll notice the cubbies are probably one of the more playful parts of this rendering, where we're pulling colors from some of the accent tiles that you see on the tile wainscots in the corridors. But we also wanted to relate back to the original concept of music, if you recall from one of our previous presentations, where the patterning for the different colors within the cubbies could be reminiscent of piano keys. Some other items that we wanted to point out in this rendering is above the cubbies, potential for teacher storage, which we know that they always need. We noted for the furniture, so some flexible seating and tables, which Mike mentioned. School furniture these days has a lot of opportunity for flexibility, whether being able to reconfigure the tables, and also making sure that we're providing ergonomic seating options, and also covering universal design, making sure that the seating is accessible to everyone and all their different needs. You'll see in the back that Tina had pointed out in the plan, the hand washing sinks. And then as you continue to move to the left of the rendering, you'll see the teaching wall with smart technology, which we're working on with the school as to exactly what that technology will be. And directly below the teaching wall, you'll see displacement ventilation diffusers. So a very efficient way that we're using in a lot of our school projects now to cool the space.
Any questions?
Sure, Tina. Now, would this view be from the teacher's desk looking out towards the classroom? Because I don't see a space for a teacher's desk. So I'm assuming that's where this photo is looking out. I mean, the rendering is looking out from the teacher's desk?
That's correct. In the rendering, it probably would sit very much in the foreground here. So we actually made it disappear just for this rendering. Otherwise, you probably would end up seeing a corner of it at the very bottom of this rendering. But again, it could be in this corner. You could probably imagine that the teacher's desk could be in this corner as well, where the teacher is standing. So the rooms are really meant to be flexible, and that's in that way where what teachers feel that may work better for them.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. And this is a last rendering of within the classroom. If you can imagine that you just walked across the teacher wall and you're standing at the other corner of the teacher wall right now, or the teaching wall, looking across the classroom. And a few things that I'll point out is that wasn't visible before is the windows. So here is one of the windows. There's another window that's off of the page. But daylight and views to the exterior is always important as part of the classroom design, as well as operable windows to allow natural ventilation on a nice cool day that they can open those up and let the air come in. Okay.
Sure. A few other points. You'll notice that the floor finish has a wood look. This is actually another resilient type product that's very sustainable and durable. And it comes in a plank format with a wood look pattern and really bringing in kind of natural looking materials. As we mentioned before, ergonomic furniture in the classrooms. And just like in the corridor, we want to make sure we're providing appropriate acoustics. So that's done here with the acoustical ceiling tile that actually slopes from the blue ceiling on the left up toward the windows. For the lighting, we really try to use fixtures that have both direct and indirect lighting. That way the indirect light pointed towards the ceiling will reflect off of the white ceiling and provide a much more comfortable light quality than just direct light. And then the last point over on the left is looking at red list free materials. So we make it a point with all of our projects to specify materials that are as sustainable as possible. So for example, with the wood on the door, we try to find woods that are FSC certified and sustainable and renewable material.
Thank you, Kate. Any questions with this? Okay. And then we'll move on. This was the last of the rendering. And then I'll give it back to Lynn to talk about the next, to talk about the budget.
Before we move on to budget, I know we had also on the agenda, if there were any comments on the draft schematic design submission. I know we received comments from several people over the past couple of weeks, but didn't know if there might be any questions or comments on the draft submission from those that are in the meeting tonight. Jeff, go ahead.
So I just had a few that I took notes on and didn't want to, I didn't send an email, but I just want to share with you. So I was looking at the project manual, that particular document. I just had some questions on page 18. There's a reference to aluminum sunshades. So I just want to, I assume those are the same ones we saw at Harvard, Larry, the aluminum sunshades?
Yeah, chances are.
Okay.
And we could show you where those are drawn if you'd like, but.
Oh, that's okay. I just, because in my mind, I was picturing what we saw there. So I just want to confirm that was it. Yep. On page 24, there's a mention of 1 8-foot marker board in the classroom. And I was just, in the rendering, I think had two, one for projection and one for the teacher to, so I'd like to talk a little bit about that at some point as we get closer to outfitting the classroom, whether 1 8-foot is enough for us. On page 38 on the ventilation piece, I appreciate that the system is going to be MERV 13 and 14 filtration. And I know what we've learned in the last 16 or 17 months, we've had to retrofit some of our systems in our other schools. So I'm glad to see that, you know, I really appreciate the fact that the MERV 13 and 14 filtration will be in there. One question on the generator. I thought we had a conversation in one meeting around that, and it's listed as diesel. Is that what we decided? That the generator would be diesel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
It's eco diesel, correct?
Well, I think that's up for discussion.
Yeah.
Still, we had brought up that it can be diesel or biodiesel.
Biodiesel, something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In terms of the equipment, it's the same equipment. There are some pros and cons to both.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to further discuss it with the school building committee as well as with the sustainability subcommittee, which is preferred, understanding the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, so that's not a decision we need to make right now, Jeff.
There's not a cost difference in,
but it won't be natural gas because one, a lot sometimes depending on the town, it's not reliable, but secondly, because we won't actually have gas service at this building.
And just to comment, the generator is located outside the aquifer protection zone. So
the well protection zone.
Right,
yes.
Well protection. Sorry. Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just a couple more. At some point, doesn't have to be tonight, but I just want to know what Mike Weber thinks about the UPS. If that specification is what it needs to be, because I know that's his. And we don't have to do it tonight, Mike, but just your comments and feedback on that.
UPS is also. I mean, that's a discussion about do we do a large UPS in the room or are they rack mounted individual based on the systems? Yeah, that's definitely a discussion we'll need to have.
On page 68, I just want to acknowledge and thank Tom again for the clock because there was a whole part on the donation. So thank you on that, Tom. And then on the bigger document on the educational plan, I just wanted to comment that the design response section of that really captured how Arrow Street took what we put in the educational plan and put that in the design of the building. So I just really appreciated that they did that and continue to do that. And I think when you look at the design response section, that really highlights that. So that's all I had for comments.
And just to note, we do still have time before we actually vote on the SD submission. which will be early September. So if anybody hasn't fully reviewed yet or has any future comments, there'll still be time to offer those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we did, just to acknowledge, we did receive Mike Weber's comments. There were a couple technical comments, as well as Tim Bonfatti's one comment as well, and they were technical. So if you'd like, we could go through them.
Yeah, I mean, just for the record, just so everybody here is clear on it. So Mike can speak to his own. I'll let him just say what his comments are. I think they were beneficial. Tim, since he's not here, I'll chime in on that. But basically, we've noted that what's called AESS steel, which is basically special steel shapes, have been getting very expensive, and they become a premium. So we've asked that the design team minimize use of AESS steel. And you know, I believe Tina and Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've already started incorporating that.
Yes, we have already thought through it during schematic design, and we do not have any AESS steel.
Oh, good. Well, there you go.
Is AES, are those just roll forms, or are those, is it a special?
They're more finely tuned pieces of steel that you might use in a special case where you want it to be, it's a certain levelness and a certain dimensional criteria that's different than structural framing steel.
So it's a tighter, okay, it's a tighter spec.
It's tighter spec is a good way to say it.
Yeah, if you're exposing steel in certain areas, as opposed to burying it in a wall, sometimes you use AESS because it's just a better look and maybe function of the design criteria. And so, right. But it is a premium, so we wanted to try to avoid that as much as possible.
And all sorts of steel are problematic now. It's almost probably like cold rolled versus hot rolled steel, the same sort of idea.
Yeah, I won't go into the technical specs, but and we do have exposed steel, but because that's part of the ceiling system and there's other services and other things in the area and it all gets painted, we don't think it's worth the premium for that in those. So where you have seen exposed steel in the various renderings would be just normal steel painted.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe that was Tim's only comment.
Correct. And
okay.
Mike, do you want to walk us through your feedback?
Generally speaking, I thought the drawings were pretty good for. I believe we were at an SD set, right? So I mean, overall, I was impressed with the work of the consultants. So nice job there. I thought the details were. Well, much more than what I expected. As an electrician by trade, I kind of focused on some of the technical stuff electrically. And this,
you don't have to get into the specifics of the vendors, Mike, but
just generally speaking, there was some items I think that we should just tighten up when we get to vendor selection and how to open up a specification and things like that to save the town some money. Also give the users the best school that we can. So ease of use is in dollars is really kind of what we'll aim for. So
yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on.
Mike, is there any concern around security with the amount of glass to the outside of the building? I know we talked about it in the past. I'm sorry for the background noise. I'm traveling.
It's okay.
But is there any? I know Jeff had brought up in the past, and I just want to kind of talk about what we just kind of revisit it for the people who are listening. Is there any concern about the amount of windows for security purposes, or is the glass like reinforced bulletproof glass, or I'm not sure what the industry has today?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. We are obviously we will be doing some specialty glass for certain locations, but because that's a security issue, that's not something we can discuss in the public zone. That typically is stuff that we only discuss in executive session because we don't want anybody to know where we're most secure and where we're least secure. And so, but yes, there will be some incorporation of specialty glass at certain areas.
Great, thank you.
Okay, what's next?
Okay, next is the project budget. And you guys, everyone should have received the draft 3011, which is MSBA's total project budget form in your meeting packet. We're still working on it, but we did want to walk you through the budget tonight and talk a little bit about it from a high level. First, I wanted to talk to you about some of the changes that have occurred at MSBA since we submitted our preferred schematic report. They've introduced some new policy changes in their grant caps, and basically these caps are to determine the eligibility and the reimbursement for all projects. And MSBA, I think over the last couple of years has really been continuously monitoring the revenue from the dedicated sales tax that's assigned to the MSBA for building schools, and also really been looking at the significant increases in construction cost. And so they've kind of tried to come up with a method to sort of level out the playing field a little bit more and provide more consistency in how they're able to distribute the grant funds that they have, and being able to spread it out to more communities. And also one good thing that they've done with this is allowed whatever grant that you've been assigned, they will allow you to move it from budget line item to budget line item without reducing the eligibility. So that's a positive that came out of this, these changes. Next, if you turn to the next page, Tina, these are some of the specific changes that have occurred, and this is effective for all projects that are seeking approval of schematic design or a project scope and budget agreement after June 1st, 2021. Up until this change, OPM costs or fees were set at a maximum of 3.5% for eligibility, and designers' fees were set at 10% of total construction costs. And the new caps have changed that slightly and have limited it to 3.5% and 10% of up to $500 per square foot of construction costs. Then the owner's contingency, there was an average pass cap of about 2%, and the new cap is limiting it to 0.5%. They are still looking at demolition and abatement. There was no defined limit in the past, and they're looking to set a limit as they move forward, but they have not agreed on that limit yet. The construction cap, we were at $333 a square foot, but it went up by up to $360 a square foot of cap, meaning that if you have a project that costs $600 a square foot, MSBA will only reimburse for $360, your reimbursement rate for up to $360 per square foot. These changes, I applied our project to both the old template and the new template that we'll show you on the next couple of pages. And I will say that even though we went up in construction costs with some of the other caps, we pretty much stayed pretty equal from one template to the next as to what the town would actually receive in terms of reimbursement. Tina, if you could go to the next slide. This is example of the MSBA total project form, which we usually call the 3011. It is a new template that was issued on July 28th. It's a very formulaic process for determining the eligibility and then the reimbursement percentage as you go through the development of the budget. And when you look at this form, you'll be able to see how the new caps were applied. Next slide, Tina. While the district has a reimbursement rate of 43.42%, when you go through this process, our actualized probable percentage is somewhere between 22.6% and 23.11% based on these new caps.
Sorry, just as a reminder for everyone, our actual reimbursement rate is 39, but we are seeking some incentive points. We get 1.5, I think, for maintenance, and we're seeking an additional 2 for the Green Schools Energy Efficiency Program. So that's an additional 3.5%, which bumps it up to 43.42.
Yes. And if you look closely at the 3011, you'll see that some of our spaces exceeded MSBA guidelines, and for the most part, they accepted all of our excess square footage, except for in 2 categories. And so we had to back out 3,380 square feet of square footage, not take it out, but basically it's 100% on the town to pay. So that's just a quick overview of the 3011. And Tina, if you can change to the next slide. This is the categories of the 3011, and these are the costs that we currently have. Again, we're still looking at all of these costs. We still have a few to kind of tighten up. And I know that Mike is still looking at it as well, but these are the categories. The feasibility study schematic design, which was previously approved at $1 million, is included. The owner's project manager's fee for the next phase of work is $2,466,060. And then there's a administrative services group of allowances.
Is what you're talking about in the slide aren't aligning? So are you referencing stuff? Because what's on the screen isn't what you're referencing. So I just want to make sure if.
Tina, I think you went too far.
Did I go too? Oh, sorry. Is this the slide?
It looks like it's out. Yours is out of order. I'm looking at my own slides.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
I needed to make them a little bigger to look at them. Sorry. So the architecture and engineering costs are included here at $6,630,650. We have some allowances included in that amount that, you know, again, we're looking at all of these costs to see where we can tighten things up.
Yes. So just a note on these, you know, we've received proposals from the OPM left field and from Arrow Street. That still is being vetted and negotiated. So these aren't final numbers, just so we're clear on that. But these are the proposed numbers from the team so far. I got those while I was on vacation, so I haven't had a chance to send my comments back to Lynn and Larry yet, but that will be coming this week. But we do have a little bit of time, not a ton, but a little bit of time, a couple of weeks to be able to negotiate this and make sure it aligns with the scope of services and that it's appropriate, and then finalize those before the SD submission.
Next slide, Tina. I think you might have to go backwards a little bit. We have included here some pre-construction services for $225,000 and the construction costs, which we've reviewed in past meetings at $64,535,190. Also, we have a group of miscellaneous project costs, and this is another one that we're really looking at, and this is utility company fees allowances. We want to make sure we've got everything covered there, as well as testing services allowances. There's a couple of other things we might want to look at there as well. Full-time construction inspection services on the geothermal wells for one. And then also in this category, we'd be looking for maybe allocating specific money for assistance with the PVs. And then we have a cost for moving and other project cost allowances of $150. The furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, and also technology budgets are set by MSBA at $1,200 per student, but this is a little higher than that. We bumped these numbers up by about $230,000 for each of these categories to align with what it actually costs to fit out these schools.
But no, nobody does it for the MSBA minimum. That's
right.
Just a cap. So ultimately, we have to make sure we're aligned with the needs of the school from for the FF&E and the technology. So I've been comparing these numbers to our other projects, and they're pretty much in line with what we're seeing on other projects. Some towns do willingly invest more than others on technology or et cetera, but these seem to be in line with what we're seeing in the marketplace.
Yes, and we have seen that on a lot of our projects that the technology costs have been coming in lower, and you're able to freely use both of these line items for any fit out of the building. So there's some buffer there, I think.
There's a lot of opportunity right now for federal dollars too. If this building gets built quick enough to outfit the school for Wi-Fi and networking, with actual reimbursement for it. So we have a.
Not quite sure exactly what you said.
We got some of that, Leo, but thanks. I think I understood the gist of it. But
a lot of the technology will also be carried in the construction costs. Some of it is part of that budget as well.
Some of the networking infrastructure and things like that are part of the base cost. Yes.
Yes. And then for contingencies, right now we're currently carrying 2% for owner's contingency and 5% for construction contingency. That's another category that we're looking at to try to make sure we get that right as well.
Yeah, I think these numbers can come down. They're in my opinion, based on similar projects. So that's something that I'm going to be working with Lynn on before we finalize the exact numbers that we're going to carry, but we're typically seeing owner's contingency around 1%, not 2%, and construction contingency, based on the complexity of the project, I think we can lower that number since, there's not a ton of risk in terms of, we know pretty much we've got a fairly flat, easy site. So the risk, we've got some risk built in to our estimates for escalation, but that would be, let's say, if escalation was in excess of our current estimate, some of that money would be able to come from these contingencies.
Okay, Tina, can you go to the next slide, please? Hopefully this slide isn't confusing, but what this shows is the total project budget, not including the contingencies, and what the estimated maximum total MSBA facilities grant is, and what the probable town share is. The first grouping of numbers is excluding contingencies and any usage of contingencies. So it shows a project of $77,376,900 with an MSBA share of $18,508,600 $58,793 and a probable town share of $58,868,106. With the full contingencies that we discussed, the 2% and the 5%, we are showing a total project budget of $81,893,663, an MSBA share of $18,929,046, and a town share of $62,964,517. It's likely that we will not be at the first grouping of numbers, nor at the second grouping of numbers. We're probably going to hit somewhere in between when the project's all said and done, and we receive MSBA's review on eligibility and reimbursement. It will fall somewhere between the 77.37 million and the 81.89 million. And again, we are looking at trying to tighten up all of these budget lines as well.
We can pretty much guarantee it won't be the first one. I don't think there's ever been a project that hasn't used some contingency. So, as Lynn noted, I think before we finalize the exact details and vote on a budget, we'll want to refine some of these contingencies. And as well finalize our negotiations with the design and OPM teams and a few of the other soft costs just to make sure that they're appropriately sized.
I don't know if anybody has any questions on the budget.
Doesn't seem like it.
So Mike, I don't know how we want to present.
You want to talk about the MSBA thing? So
yes. So MSBA requires that 2 weeks in advance of the submission of the schematic design that we provide a letter. It's a template letter, and essentially it wants to know what the owners or the designers cost estimate is, and the OPM's cost estimate, the reconciled cost estimates. And then it wants to know what the OPM thinks that the probable total project budget is, and what the town or district determines their that they don't want their project budget to exceed. So those four numbers, yes, those 4 numbers they're asking for in advance of the schematic design so that they have it. And when the schematic design submission is submitted, we can't exceed those numbers basically. Is why they're looking for it. They want to know, and they want to have that to provide to their reviewers so that as they review the schematic design submission that, they can determine whether or not they think we stay within those total project budget limits that were set.
So what we need to do tonight is basically set that sort of cap. And, I've been running some numbers just to see the range based on where I think the contingencies should fall out and some of the other line items. And basically we've refined it down to, in my mind, to sort of a range between 80 and 82 as a total project budget, what I see as sort of based on how some of these things shake out, but 82 sort of being the high end. We need to be able to state that to the MSBA ahead of time, and then we have an additional couple of weeks to work out the final details on where we'll land within that range that I mentioned. So wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts or comments on that or questions, because I know it's kind of a sort of an odd process, but I wanted to open it up. I see Mike Marcucci unmuting, so I'm going to give you the floor first. Mike, do you have a question?
Sure. I don't really have a process question. I've just got a couple of budget questions, but whenever you want to take those.
Yeah, you can. Right now is fine.
So we did, kind of, and I apologize for missing the last meeting if we went through this in detail, but I know we did 2 or 3 meetings ago, kind of the value engineering voting on the various items and cut off some stuff, which I think most of this is out of here. But could it, some of the design team talk about what the building would look like if we had to make a much more significant cut to the cost? In other words, if someone came out and said, well, our cap is a total budget of $55 million or $60 million, what are the kind of things that we'd be cutting to make that kind of a significant reduction from what's proposed here? Would it be making the classroom smaller? Would it be cutting? I mean, what would we do if we had to do that?
So I'll let Larry jump in on that, but before we do that, it's tough for them to answer that without sort of some parameters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if we're talking about if we were to cut 5 million, what would it look like? You know, or is it 8 million? You know, like those are big differences, I guess. So
yeah.
I would think, and Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, that we need a little bit of understanding of some sort of parameters. I know we did do our initial value engineering, and we do have some items still on the list for if, you know, future estimates come in high due to escalation. And then there were some on the list that start to impact program, which is a whole nother issue. So Larry, I don't know if you had any thoughts on Mike's question, or if Mike, you can refine it a little bit further, but
I'm happy to refine it however is necessary. But just in looking at the total amount of the budget, right? I mean, you have, I think with any building, you could sort of have your bare minimum building to code, right? You have X number of kids that we are required to educate in this building according to the MSBA, or be able to educate in this building according to the MSBA. And then I think you could start sort of with, here is the bare minimum required to build a building to code for this number of kids, right? Somewhere above a tent, but basically whatever the minimum would be. And then you kind of build from there. And so I'm just trying to think, you know, where are we on the scale from tent to Taj Mahal? And if we had to make the kind of reduction in the building that I think would make a meaningful difference from a tax standpoint, what are we giving up?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I would hesitate to say somewhere between tent and Taj Mahal to put our finger on it. But thinking of it a slightly different way, and I'll answer part of your question, the size of the classrooms is set by the MSBA. And the space program is pretty well set by the MSBA. So the size of the building itself is pretty fixed. There is a multiplier that you go from net to gross of 1.5.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that, net to gross?
In other words, if you add up all the classrooms, let's say you get 20,000 square feet, and then to put in the hallways and the exterior walls and the walls between classrooms and other things, that's called the gross building area. And that usually is about 50% more.
Non-program space, Mike, like circulation, the bathrooms, mechanical rooms, bathrooms, yeah.
Mechanical rooms, all those kind of things. And while that may sound a place you might want to look at, it's pretty hard in many cases because a lot of those items are set by their various uses. You know, we've gotten it down really tight when we have a very, very, very efficient building. We've been able to bring that below 1.5, but not significantly. So the size of the building is kind of fixed under the MSBA process. And I think oftentimes that's where you get the most savings if you can cut the size of the building. So in some sense, their process has tied our hands a bit.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand,
I mean, how much larger are we than the minimum they require?
Very little. It's I believe a couple thousand square feet max.
So like 2% of 3% over.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. Larry, do you remember that? Do you have those numbers of the?
Well, I know the let's see, the gym is slightly larger than their minimum sizes. Right. The cafeteria, or sorry, the stage is slightly larger.
Yep.
Music room was slightly larger. We took out, to try and save some dollars, we took out the idea we were going to have a small daycare room in the building, if you remember that exercise. Tina, there may be one or other spaces that I'm forgetting at the moment.
Yeah, those are the majority. And I think in the 3011, I think, Lynn, you actually had a number in there. Otherwise, I could look it up also. I think it was about 3,300 square feet.
3,380, and that is the ineligible excess stage and PE spaces that they had indicated that they would not participate in reimbursement for.
Again, that's like 4% or 3% of the total square footage of the building.
That's about right, Mike. Yep.
All right. So let's say you did that, right? Let's say you went back to the bare minimums. You'd be giving up a larger stage. You'd be giving up a larger gym, both of which, from my perspective, are good things. We're just trying to understand what it would be. What would the next thing be, Larry? If the bond market came back to Medfield and said, "Look, Medfield, we are only going to loan you $50 million or $45 million, right? That's all we're going to do." And I know the bond market is probably not that specific, but let's say that was the maximum borrowing we have. What would the next thing you would do after you took that modest amount of square footage down?
But as Mike said, there's a variety of different things we identified a few weeks ago, I guess months ago now, kind of 6 or 8 weeks ago. And we went through that list. A lot of things can be revisited. I think the tricky part for us is that at this point, the MSBA wants the budget in alignment with the drawings in a way that says, okay, what you're showing us in your drawings is what you're willing to and have budgeted for in your project. Beyond that, there's a lot of things we look at. A lot of folks oftentimes say, well, can we reduce the finishes as a percentage of construction costs? Finishes are often a small amount compared to other more fundamental things, earthwork, foundations, structural steel, those kind of things. So it's a little hard to sort of
just as a frame of reference, though, Mike, like all of those things that Larry's mentioning are in the range of maybe a million or two, not 10.
That's what I'm trying to understand. Just kind of talk through.
Yeah, I just want to give you, like, if we're talking 5 million plus, we've got a serious issue. We might be able to achieve another million or two if we decide not to pursue net zero, but then that requires a whole redesign. It requires all sorts of things. So there's definitely some dominoes to that kind of big revision. But is there a potential to look at some things to reduce by a million or two? Yes, we do have some of that built into our VE. If the next round of estimates comes in and we're prices spike higher and we've got to deal with that again, we do have some opportunity to do that before we start to really feel some pain. And when I say that, I mean by cutting program. Like we could look at things like eliminating the outdoor classrooms, but that's relatively small numbers in terms of value, but they're not going to get us, they'll get us $100,000 or something tops if we do both of them. So that's sort of the frame of reference of the things that we were looking at. I mean, I think the total VE list that we had was somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 million or so, and we have already accepted close to 3 million of it.
Right. So at some point, the next step would be, cutting more fundamentally into what the building is supposed to do.
Yeah, its function, its program. Yeah, and I mean, if we're talking as significant as 5 million, then I don't see a path to that. I don't see a path that we get the program that we have for this building by cutting that major a chunk out of the price. That's just my take, but I don't know.
And presuming, obviously, we have to comply with the MSBA minimums in order to qualify for the reimbursement at all. So at some point, you cut it back so much that you're then going to disqualify yourself from reimbursement because.
Right. They just won't participate then, and that'll become an issue with reimbursement and how much they decide to give back to us. Or withdraw altogether.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mike.
No problem.
Larry.
Can I ask a similar question, but in a different way? Just level of finishes. So kind of using Mike's example from a tent to a Taj Mahal, you know, when we talk about tile, when we talk about hardscape, when you talk about, you know, lighting fixtures, things of that nature. Like in what range? I mean, are you middle of the road? Are there still VE opportunities in that realm of things? And I know it's not 5 million, but there might be hundreds of thousands of dollars in those areas. Just what range do we specify those things in? That's all.
I would say what we're doing is generally consistent with other schools around that you're seeing built. And then there's certainly within that, there's wiggle room either within the scope itself, you know, let's build a tile, but a little less height to it or not in these areas. Or you say, well, can we save a little dollars on the tile itself and go from, you know, something that's so many dollars a foot to something that's a little less. And both of those things can help add up. I would tend to agree with Mike, you know, there's a lot of ways to nibble at the dollars, but eventually to take really big chunks out, it becomes much more difficult.
So Mike, I'll add to that obviously we're always comparing projects in our office. And we have just in our office, I think we've got 5 elementary schools going right now. Some that are very similar in size and scope, including one I'm working on in Ashland. We've got projects in Wellesley and Westwood and Norwood and Walpole. So it's always, we're always comparing just to sort of see where we stand. And I know we've done some comparison previously as we've gone through this process on cost. And our numbers deliberately are aimed at being on the lower end of the range, you know, sort of below the 50%, you know, midpoint. And I think that's where we are. You know, we're not at the bottom, but I think we're in a good place. We've been fairly conservative, which is why we were able to propose some of those reductions at the VE, just to make sure that we were falling in line. And as I mentioned, so, you know, I'm doing a project in Ashland right now that has very similar scope. It's 635 kids, grades 3 to 5, slightly larger. It's 105,000 square feet. And our numbers, if you escalate them, because we're in this process almost a year behind them. So if you escalate those numbers to our numbers, we're basically right on level with it. So that gave me a comfort level because that's sort of, I think, a relevant comparison. You know, Ashland is a conservative town, and so I thought that was a good comparison. We've got projects in Wellesley that are, you know, higher. They've chosen, money's, I guess, less of an object. They're able to, you know, choose to spend more on things than we would or some other towns would. So we can definitely revisit that and share that with everybody. Just
no, I think it's, yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, Mike, but I think you answered the question well in regards to, hey, look at, you know, overall the design is, you know, on the less expensive, but, you know, we didn't design any building materials here to be super expensive on purpose. Right.
It's not bare bones, but it's a very conservative building in my mind.
Perfect, thanks.
Anyone else have any questions?
All right, I had another question.
Go ahead.
The ask tonight was to present to the MSBA kind of an overall dollar value that we will not exceed, correct?
Correct, and I'm proposing that number to be 82 million.
Yeah. So what's the challenge? Why don't we just say 85 and come in low? What's the difference?
Well, number one, I don't want the public to think that we're, you know, just putting a number out there that's unrealistic. I'm fairly certain that the number is only going to go down from where it is right now, because I think there's some areas where we can cut. I don't see any reason why it should go up. So, I think if it's that far out of whack, the MSBA is going to go, what are you doing?
They'll question it. They'll want to know why. And for the OPM's estimate for total project budget, I'll probably use this 81,893,663 number. And if the district's number is 82 million, I mean, I think that's, we'll be below those numbers.
Yeah, and so just again, that's not a final budget. Like I said, I expect it to go down between now and when we submit to the MSBA in September.
But there's no harm.
And we'll ultimately vote on make sure we're all in agreement on the final budget.
Right. So I guess my point is that there's no real discussion on trying to get the number any lower now because we have some time to do that. We just need to present them something that we will not exceed, and if we're comfortable at 82 million, then it's not even a real discussion. We just said, hey,
yeah. I mean, I'm not comfortable that the committee has been, given enough time to really drill down into this stuff. So I want to give everybody as much time as possible to make sure they fully understand it before we as a committee vote on the final numbers. But we are required to maintain schedule. We are required to submit this letter. So, what I'm suggesting here is that, we approve the OPM to submit the letter as a not to exceed 82 million. And then between now and our next meeting, which I believe will be September 1st, we'll finalize negotiations on the design and OPM contracts. And I think tweak some of the contingencies, which in my mind can come down. So we'll try to finalize those numbers, and certainly would welcome input from the committee if they had any comments about any of the soft costs, or I mean the construction costs. Obviously, we've already been through. We've got professional estimators that have done all that, but the soft costs and things like that, we want to make sure. It's kind of like budgeting is an art form, right? We want to thread the needle. We don't want it to be too high so that the town doesn't approve it. We don't want it to be too low and have a budget we can't meet. So we want to make sure that it's well thought out. So I think we've got a couple of weeks to be able to do that and answer any other questions that you may have.
My only concern, Mike, is that when we budget this stuff and we're prioritizing the cut list, that we are making sure that we're putting in materials and using things that are maintainable, but we're not short funding things that are going to cost long maintenance schedules to maintain because we didn't put a good product in. That kind of stuff. That's the stuff that we cut out the janitor's closet, so we have to hire a second janitor because
no, we're not doing anything like that. Yeah.
That kind of stuff, and I've seen it. It's happened in big projects,
Sure.
And
absolutely.
So, and I saw that list, and that was minor stuff, and I still think we're in a good. I still respect the expertise of this team 100%. So we're asking questions that a lot of people have to pay for, but I want the people who are listening to understand that we're not being penny wise and dollar foolish on this either. So, and we're still going to get a building that's going to be long lasting, into 50 years from now.
That's the decision process that we went through at VE, where I think we all as a group went through the items and took the ones that really have little impact on the school or on the long-term operations and maintenance of the school. And any of those that we felt were questionable in terms of, significantly impacting that long-term operation and maintenance of the school, those were tabled, until if it comes down to it, to a more dire situation. Our goal here, or I shouldn't say our goal, but in my mind, presenting this project to the town is not presenting the cheapest possible option. It's presenting the best possible option for a building that'll last us 50 plus years. And sometimes that requires a little bit more money up front, but you save money in the long run. And that's part of the reason why we chose, and the Board of Selectmen supported the decision to go to a net zero building. And that required a little bit more money up front, but in the long run will allow us to, not only help with climate change, but it will allow us to save a lot of money on utility costs long term.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions on budget? Okay, so what I'd like to do is, if you're all willing, I'll like to entertain a motion to approve the OPM to submit the budget letter to the MSBA with a not to exceed amount of 82 million for the total project budget. Would anyone be willing to make that motion?
So moved. Yeah, I'll make a motion.
All right, I have a motion from Mike Weber. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Mike Marcucci. Okay, running down the list. Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Walt Kincaid.
Yes.
Tom Erb.
Yes.
Mike Marcucci.
Yes.
Leo Brem.
Yes.
And Mike Weber.
Yes.
Quinlan also votes yes. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, so and then at our next meeting, we'll drill down into the details and finalize the detailed budget. And then once we do that, we'll be able to work with Christine and Nick and the folks at Town Hall to really drill down into tax impact projections based on where we project bond percentages, interest rate percentages, et cetera. So we can start to build that information and get that out to the public, because I know that's going to be vital over the next couple of months before we get to November's town meeting. And as such, we also have some meetings scheduled with Bob Sliney and his colleagues on the warrant committee in September and then into October, really making sure they understand what we've put together as a budget and allow them to answer questions so they can ultimately come up with their recommendation before special town meeting in November. All right, unless there's any other questions on budget, Lynn, anything else on our agenda?
I have a quick update from the communications subcommittee. I don't see Anime on here.
Anime couldn't make it tonight. I think
Okay.
she sent the summary to Gina.
Yeah, she did. I'll read it off right now. So what she wrote was there's 10 more weeks until November, and the goal is to engage and inform Medfield residents as much as possible. They're also creating mini video clips of many of these meetings as a quick resource and are working on adding them to a YouTube channel, and this will be shared as soon as it's ready. The next one is the goal is to be more present on social media with a couple of weekly posts followed by links to more information. They've been updating regularly Hometown Weekly. The next community conversation is Wednesday, August 25th. Once a fall forum is set, they will advertise this event. She also wanted to remind everyone that Medfield Day is September 25th, and the subcommittee will be sending out a sign up in hopes that SBC members can cover some of the time slots to cover that day. And she also said, please pass on fun, engaging suggestions to Leo. And the last one is to please consider hosting a neighborhood/friends/book club gathering to share information about the project. Let Anime know if you need anything. And lastly, as she always ends her report, she says, if there's any suggestions to improve communications or for suggested posts, please pass on to Anime. And that's all she had.
So yeah, and I wasn't able to attend the last community conversation, but maybe Jeff, I know you were there. Maybe you can provide just a quick update for the group on how that went at the end of July.
Sure, Mike. Yeah, it went very well. It was well attended. I think we had 15 or 16 folks in person and then another 30 or so online. We had Steve Brenham and Mary Brule talk about the educational benefits of the school and where it's being built at Wheelock. Lots of good questions. I thought it was really, a positive night, and we're looking forward to the next one. Hopefully get even more community folks in as folks come back from vacation and get more engaged with the process.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
And next is a sustainability subcommittee update. I don't think Megan is on. Tom, do you have anything to add?
Not really. We didn't have a meeting since the last one. We've been talking with a solar firm. Other than that, that's about it at this point.
Okay, thank you. And then Gina, if you want to go over what's upcoming on the project schedule.
Sure. So in the milestones in the packet, I'm just going to quickly run through. So we've got the next thing on the schedule is the 25th community conversation. And also August 25th will be the project budget submitted to the MSBA. Then we have on September 1st, which will be the next SBC meeting. And that will be the review and final vote on the final SD submission. They'll also cover review debt services, review the vote for the proprietary items letter, and the vote on the final project budget. And then after September 1st, on September 8th will be the submission to the MSBA for the schematic design. And then September 30th, we have a tentative community forum. October 8th, we have listed as the facilities assessment subcommittee meeting. And October 27th is MSBA board approval of the SD. October 28th, 21st is another community forum. And then I have listed last on there is the first week of November, tentatively is a special town meeting. And what is missing there, just below that should be the second week of November, which tentatively would be the ballot vote. So that's what I have for the schedule.
Yeah, so we should start to look at finalizing dates for the special town meeting and the ballot. I'm gonna look to Mike Marcucci and Christine to see, I mean, I can propose some dates, but I don't know, it's got to be after the October board meeting of the MSBA, which I believe happens on the 28th. And so what I was just brainstorming was that we would have special town meeting the following week. So, if not sure if we need to do a Monday or a Tuesday or whatever, but anytime that week I think is best. But and then the ballot can be as early as the next day. It actually can be before, but it generally isn't the best way to do it. But the ballot can be the next day. It should be as close as possible to the special town meeting. Sometimes it's a week away, but I wouldn't want to get further out than a week, just because you begin to lose some attention. So generally speaking, it's good to have the ballot close to the special town meeting. So I don't know if either of you have any thoughts, or any other members of the committee have any thoughts on those dates.
We haven't had a discussion yet with the Board of Selectmen as to what it will be. I think we recognize that the ball is in our court to talk it through. I think the rough timing you've suggested is correct, but we've got a few things to look at and discuss. But we only have to call it 14 days in advance, but we can certainly announce the date before it's formally called.
Yeah, I think we need to communicate it to the MSBA. They're going to be asking that. So just let us know, I guess, once you've had those conversations. And would it be possible? I don't know when your upcoming meetings are, but
pretty much all the time. Looking at our schedule last night, we're pretty much meeting constantly from now until the end of September. So if you can catch us on one of our twice a day meetings in that period,
slow nights,
we'll put it on there. Yeah, and it's going to really slow down though once we start looking at the hospital proposals as well.
Oh, sure, yeah, definitely slow down.
So we'll take a number on the town meetings as well. Maybe we'll have like 3 of those in a row in November too. So no, I'm just kidding on that. But yeah, we know the ball's in our court on that, and we'll figure that out sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you.
Just for the record, I did give them one Tuesday in September off. Happens to be the day after Labor Day. Just for the record.
You're so kind.
We have it off for now. I won't be confident until 4 o'clock on Thursday, I think would be the relevant time to post that meeting. So
that is fair.
I'm not counting it out.
I'm so glad you brought up the hospital proposals, Mike. So do any of our plans for this building include the hospital proposals at all? No. That's a loaded question. I know it was. And that was to both Mikes.
Yeah.
Include them?
No.
Yeah, so like, you know, if we built
project.
some dwellings out there, right? You know, if we built a couple of tents up there, not Taj Mahals, but just tents. But kids happen to live in the tents in Medfield and they have to go to a school. We should probably, you know, we can't take that in consideration in our current building if we didn't. But we should probably be thinking about that for the next 10 years, right? So I'm not sure how quickly Pulte can stick up 750 buildings, 750 houses.
All right. Leo, we're diverting off course a little bit.
Can somebody mute Leo, please?
Yeah,
Just putting it out there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know whether I don't think that the MSBA enrollment projections include additions to the hospital.
They don't.
I think, as you know, I think there's enough room in them to accommodate almost any proposal that's going to be at the hospital without worry.
Be careful what you say, Mike.
So.
My bad.
Oh shit.
I mean, you can just look at me. If you look at, I mean, MSBA always cites Hopkinton as the whole issue, but you know, in the census data came out recently, the state as a whole grew at 7.4%. Medfield grew at 6.4%. Our population is back to what it was in 1980. Meanwhile, Hopkinton's grew by 26% in that same period of time. So 4 or 5 times more than, 4.5 times more than us. But thank you for bringing that up, Leo. I appreciate it.
All right. Any other thoughts or questions on the schedule? All right. We're certainly entering crunch time. The next 2 months are going to be hot and heavy. So rest up, especially Mike, with apparently they're already hot and heavy for him. So
Mike, we also have invoices to go over.
Yep. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we were done on schedule. So go ahead, Lynn.
So in your packets, you should have received the July invoice summary. It included 2 invoices from one from Left Field and one from Air Street. The Left Field invoice included $3,500 for OPM services and $14,850 for A.M. Fogarty's schematic design estimating costs for a total of $18,350. And Air Street's invoice was for $21,600.18 for a total expenditure for the month of July of $39,950.18. This represents 99% of the feasibility and schematic design budget being spent.
Anyone have any questions or comments on the invoices? Not hearing any, would anyone like to make a motion on the invoices? Not all at once.
Yeah, my motion to approve, Mike.
All right, I've got a motion to approve the invoices as presented from Mike Weber. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
I got a second from Tom Irv. All right, running down the list. Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Walt Kincaid.
Yes.
Tom Irv.
Yeah.
Mike Marcucci.
Yep.
Leo Brem.
Yep.
Mike Weber.
Yes.
Mike Quinlan also votes yes.
Okay, thank you. And then this brings us to any other business, new business, or discussions?
So I'll open it up to the committee first, and then I'll open it up to the public, just a reference for the public. If you wouldn't mind, please state your name and address with your question in the Q&A. Or if you have something you'd like to speak about, please put your name and address and state that. While we were waiting for that to occur, I know there's one question in there already. We will answer that in a moment. But does the committee have any new business that they'd like to discuss? Okay, I'll take silence as a no. All right, moving on to the public input section. First up, I have a question from Robert Eigler. I know he's a resident, but if you wouldn't mind just throwing your address in there and I'll read that off. But first I'll read your question. Our house overlooks the front of the Wheelock School. The schematic notes that the existing trees lining Elm Street will remain following the construction of the new extended parking lot. Does the schematic note refer to all of the existing oak and maple trees or only to certain trees? If the latter, then what trees will be removed and what trees will remain? Additionally, will new trees be planted along Elm Street to mitigate the lighting and noise effects of the larger parking lot? I know I'll defer to the design team, but I know that the plan is to save as many as possible of the existing trees. I think there are a few that just need to come out more towards the eastern side of the site where the sort of field loop is today, just because we do need to adjust some of the curb cuts in that area. And I know there is a plan to add some additional trees. So I'll look to Tina or Larry to provide a little bit more detail.
That's correct, Mike. As you mentioned, we are going to try to preserve as many of the existing trees along Elm Street. And with the new parking, there will be a few that's going to have to be removed, as well as some of the adjustments for the bus loop and that curb cut that that feeds into the bus loop and into the new school. There are several new trees that are planned. Those locations are shown on the landscape plan. This is schematic and they'll be further developed on the next phase.
So, Mr. Eigler, we do have some flexibility. We can certainly look at traffic patterns and things like that. I would note that the parking lot is only slightly larger than the existing in terms of overall capacity. But we also are sort of redirecting cars a little bit, such that we're actually eliminating one place or two places where cars will actually exit onto Elm currently. So there'll be less opportunities for cars exiting the site to be facing a house. There will only be one in and out for the Wheelock School and one in and out for the new school. So those two locations will reduce the amount of time that any cars will be pointed directly across Elm Street. Most of the traffic will circulate along that new Wheelock School drop-off loop and parking area, more horizontal and parallel to the school and Elm Street, as opposed to perpendicular to it. But we certainly, landscaping is something we have a lot of flexibility with, so we can take a look. We're certainly willing to look at, any of the houses along the street and figure out if we can avoid having light spillage from cars as we get into more detailed planning in future phases. So I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to chime back in again. Also, just one thing to note, we did review, Arrow Street did do a walkthrough with the tree warden, just to make sure that they were up to speed on, which trees would be would remain and which trees would potentially come down. And he was okay with what we were proposing and actually welcomed it, because some trees, not necessarily the ones along Elm, but some trees, especially between the fields and the Wheelock School, that are highly damaged and are going to die anyway. So some of those will all come out. But we have reviewed that with the tree warden. All right, next question from Chris McHugh Potts, 7 Curve Street. MSBA sent an enrollment certification letter to the chair of our Board of Selectmen dated July 13th, and it was due back to the MSBA by about August 3rd with signatures from school committee chair and superintendent. What is the status of that letter? I'm surprised it wasn't on tonight's agenda since it's overdue. An email was sent to SBC chair with this question, but I did not hear about. Yes, I received your email as I was on vacation, so I have since returned, so I apologize for the delay, but I was not checking my email that closely. But I can give you an update on that. The reason it's not on tonight's agenda is because this committee is not voting on that or signing that. It wasn't directed to us. So we will not be necessarily taking that up or putting it on the agenda. We have discussed with the MSBA, they're completely understanding that it was delayed. Obviously, you know, summertime and things like that, they didn't think there was any issue with it coming in as soon as we're able to get committees together to sign off on it, namely the Board of Selectmen and the school committee. We also have the Dr. Marsden's signature ready to go for that. But that will be signed by those committees and sent back to the MSBA.
Yes, and it's really a formal certification of what was submitted in the preferred schematic report, of which the committee voted on.
I mean, it's the same thing we've been using all along, and apparently that I didn't get that in my mail, and apparently the email ended up in Christine's spam folder. So, because I was surprised to see it, Lynn, when you had sent it.
You should be able to, and maybe Owen can help out Christine. You should be able to use the domain and accept everybody from that domain, the Mass School Buildings domain, so that that doesn't happen in the future.
We'll have it changed. We're having an issue with some of our emails coming into spam. Gus and I are having an issue communicating back and forth through email. So I have found it in my spam folder, and we will take care of that and put it on the next one.
Well, that might have more to do with your settings, Christine. I don't know.
Yeah. So left field will coordinate making sure that gets signed and returned to the MSBA. But the MSBA is aware that, and they understand that it's beyond what's their 21 days, and they have no issue with it. All right, so that's all the open questions on the Q&A. So unless anyone has any further question or comment, I will entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening.
Motion to adjourn.
I got a motion from Jeff Marsden. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Second from Tom Erb. Running down the list, Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Walt Kincaid.
Yes.
Tom Erb.
Yes.
Mike Marcucci.
Yes.
Leo Brum.
Yes.
And I think that was a yes. Mike Weber.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. All right. Thanks everybody for your time, and enjoy what's left of the summer.
Good night, folks.
Have a good evening.